Be the Talk, episode 289, featuring Kristen Lueck. Welcome to Be the Talk. We go behind the talk 7 days a week for tips and techniques to help you change the world. I'm Nathan Eckel, and a talker myself. I'm interviewing others who change the world with their talk. You can too, even if you've never given a talk before. Let's get started with today's show. We are live with Kristen Lueck. Kristen, are you ready to talk?
I'm ready.
Kristen Lueck is the head of Man-Made Music, and at Man-Made Music, Kristen lives to play connect the dots, using Kristen's strategic prowess to draw connections between projects, partners, and creative ideas to spark iconic work and meaningful collaborations. Kristen Lueck, welcome to the talk.
Thank you. And I would say head of business development.
Head of business development. Okay. Thanks for the correction. Little snafu right there on my end. Head of business development. So your talk is called Why Do Music and Sound Resonate? And pretty interesting stuff. I know with some of my own musical training, I always think of Wagner and his operas and his leitmotifs, and you don't really talk specifically about that, but it was really very fascinating about the difference between music and sound and really what's going on in movies, a whole bunch of things. Please take us behind the talk, Kristen.
Absolutely. So this talk was a challenge at first. I had to really think about, after 7 years being here at Man-Made Music, how do I explain what we do and why it's so powerful? And the only way I could think to do that was natural for me was to think about music and sound as giving us superpowers. And when I thought more about that, it made a lot of sense to me. So, for example, in my talk, once I had that framework of superpowers, I was able to line up, sound allows us to shapeshift. And what I mean by that, it can augment reality. And we experience that every day when we're commuting to work and put a playlist on, or working out at the gym and put a playlist on to pump us up. We're augmenting what's happening around us with sound. And so I did that for 5 or 6 other types of superpowers. And it gave me a way to just sort of naturally explain something very abstract and complicated.
Yeah, well, you walk out on the stage of your talk and you had the wrong music, so you backed up and you came back on again and they had the wrong music again, and then you backed up and then you came out again. Actually, it wasn't the wrong music. It was the right music, but that was a really kind of effective way. I know with people that I work with in the Get Accepted program, we're always looking for that moment when people can lean in, and I'm listening for that. I was leaning in all the way because you were literally backing up and did three attempts to get on stage, which of course was planned. So was that an original idea that you had from the very beginning, or when did that strike you?
Yeah, that was something I knew I wanted to make it visceral in some way. And, talking about sound, you can only talk about it so much before you just need people to feel it, because that's why it's so powerful. A lot of it is subconscious to us. We don't realize it. And so I wanted to have this moment where people realized how powerful sound was and shaping a perception of me. So, if I walk on to rock and roll music versus hip hop music versus classical music, even though they don't realize it, they're going to be setting up, oh, this talk is serious, or she's maybe cool, or maybe not cool, like super not cool. And even those unconscious decisions in their own minds are setting up their behavior, their mood, and their expectations for the rest of my talk. And so my team and I, thought that would be a great way to try it out. I had never done that before, so I was personally a little afraid and embarrassed to do it, but I'm glad I tried it, and I'm glad it seemed to be a bit impactful.
Well, and it was an effective opener. I mean, I don't know how many people were at your event, but sometimes after speaker number 5 or speaker number 25, some of these speaker number 35, you've really got to demonstrate right from really literally the first step in your case, or maybe the 9th step when you turned around, that, oh, okay, this is going to be an interesting, this is not going to be a lecture. This is going to really be a true, branded talk. So, I think you absolutely did that.
And I do want to add what was interesting about my experience. I was in Madrid, Spain, and I was speaking to a group of students and professionals, I would say maybe around 200, who spoke obviously both Spanish and English. And I was number 9 out of 10 and only the second English speaker.
Oh, wow.
And so what was interesting was using sound, which is so universal, could still convey that point, even if they didn't understand the language, though they did. But again, it's music and sound is such a universal language and tool.
Well, and it really is. So in your talk, you say that sound does 3 things. It creates expectations, it creates associations, and it lets you know whether a story is resolved or not. And, I mean, it's as simple as, stepping on stage or having your favorite keynote speaker at a conference. And it's like, what do they play as that person is speaking on stage, stepping on stage? Is it pump up the jam music? Is it something else? Is it something a little bit offbeat or silly or quirky? You're right. It absolutely sets the tone.
And, it's Halloween today. And one of the stories I talk about is how in scary films, sound is really impactful, right? To help us with that scare. And what they do in editing, they have to make sure that the sound and the visual cue is not aligned at the same time because we hear and process our senses at different speeds. And so because we process sound so quickly, if we were to hear the scare before we saw it, it would give it away. And so there's even little things like that where that sound, that thing we process so quickly is telling us a story. And while that's happening in our everyday life, we at Man-Made try to apply that to brands and spaces and television in terms of conveying that message to audiences.
All right. So if I heard that right, so they have to not sync the sound, but actually delay the sound in the case of like a horror movie so that we see the scary thing, react to that, and then maybe there's a scary sound as opposed to smacking us all at once. That's something I never realized.
I believe so, because by the time it'll feel like it's happening at the same time to us, but those milliseconds matter.
That's really interesting because it's like the speed of light versus the speed of sound. The speed of sound is much slower than the speed of light. So that's so counterintuitive. What an interesting thing.
I could be wrong, though.
Okay.
Actually, yeah. But things like that definitely are happening in film. And of course, we know as we hear scores that guide us on knowing that this character may not be trustworthy, but we don't know why. And a lot of it has to do with what we're hearing at that time. Or why are we feeling happy, or why are we feeling a sense of resolution? Theme parks do that a lot too. I think I mentioned just the idea of even walking through Disney or other theme parks that just by what you're hearing in the soundtrack lets you know there's a story happening here to unravel, or the story's over, march along, move on out. There's nothing left to experience.
Now, you mentioned in your talk that sometimes, not sometimes, but they did a little study and they swapped out film music or underscores, and they completely validated the effect that it had to study, and they researched it, and they found all kinds of ways that we can manipulate ourselves through through underlying sound. So that's not such a nice word, but that's essentially we can control and change things. So I mean, not to kind of be a leading question, but how would you reframe that if there's a better way to reframe that, and then what's kind of the impact of that, Kristen?
Yeah, I think from that study, I think it was Tufts University did that study, and they found that, knowing that you can create associations to things that aren't necessarily implied explicitly is a powerful tool, in the sense that when you know your audience and you know how you want them to feel, and maybe that's not always good. Maybe there's situations where you want them to feel uncomfortable or scared, but maybe you want them to feel loyalty or a sense of trust, that you can use music and sound to elicit those feelings subconsciously or consciously. And so while I wouldn't say manipulation, I think it's another tool. Again, we don't live in a world without our other senses visually or touch or things like that, but it's a tool that can heighten and elicit certain feelings and expectations when used strategically. Because the other thing I say too is whether you're strategic about it or not, this is happening. So it's not like it's off and then you decide to turn it on. As a brand or as a person, you might as well be strategic about how you surround yourself with sound. And we actually, I don't think I mentioned it, but we call it sonic humanism, which is the idea that the right music and sound can make life richer and simpler. if we're being proactive and strategic about that, whether, again, that's for fun or even for ICU rooms in hospitals, things of that nature.
Well, and you mentioned a bit about brands, and they have really short little sounds that I've noticed. It's very subtle, but you'll watch a Honda commercial and have that da-da, little minor third, I think it is. And they just put that right at the beginning, maybe right at the end, and it just kind of, it's really almost subliminal, because you're not thinking about it, but it really does cue that up. What do you have any idea the magnitude of the impact that actually has, measured, in, I don't know, advertising revenue or profits or something like that?
Sure. No, that's a great question. I don't have the specific numbers in front of me, but I know, at least for the work we've done with our brands, creating what we call these sonic identity systems or sonic branding for them, that you can, we have something called sonic pulse research. And so we can actually measure the emotional appeal of the sound, if there has been a shift in brand perception, and some other things of that nature. And we've actually seen lifts between, 30 and 40% in terms of emotional appeal positively towards a brand once they've had this consistent use of music and sound. And, we often see brands investing so much money in their visual identity system, their color palette, where it should show up, why it should never be purple, why it should never be used here or in this texture. And what we're creating is that strategy and that sound environment in this very similar way. Not, in some cases, it's these 3 notes, use them over and over and over again to gain attribution. And in fact, one of our clients, AT&T, I think in the first 6 to 8 months of it being on air, raised their brand attribution and association by a staggering percent. I mean, almost recognized as much as the NBC chimes, which have been around since the radio days.
Yeah.
So
NBC, that's what we're talking about. Sorry, everybody, but just to drive that home.
So it's a powerful tool for attribution and association if a brand or a product can use it consistently.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not affiliated with TED in any way, but before you watch those videos, they have a really, that little raindrop sound comes in, and the whole warm little envelope under that, and it really does kind of prime you for hopefully good things to come. Actually, TED Talks are always pretty amazing. Big TED.
Yeah, and actually, that's a great point. And as we move into an era of audio first interactions like podcasts or Alexa voice skills or other kind of voice commanded environments, sound is going to play a major role for brands to get that credit. Imagine listening to the TED podcasts or asking for one on your smart speaker. When you hear that drop, you're so used to seeing it matched, to the visuals, but now you're accustomed to hear it only and still get that same attribution and know, okay, I can trust this. This is coming from TED or whatever it may be. But we're seeing brands realize to get credit for experience, they need to have that audio mark now that there's no more visual experiences or they're lessening.
We've been enjoying this conversation with Kristen Lueck. She is the head of development at Man Made Music, and we've been talking about why music and sound resonates. And we're going to pivot over to you, Talk Universe. We're going to talk about the preparation and performance of her talk in just a moment in the Blitz Round. Hey, Talk Universe. I hope you've been enjoying today's episode with today's guest. But you know what? Many people want more than that. Many people that listen to Be the Talk actually want to give a talk. And if that's you, you're not alone. Listen to the rest of this podcast. At the end, I'll have a free resource for you just for listening. And we are here in the Blitz Round with Kristen Lueck. We are going to talk about different preparation and performance elements. I'm going to ask her a series of either or questions. Kristen, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. First question. Were you invited to speak or did you apply?
I was invited.
Are you a memorizer, an improviser, or a blender?
I was a memorizer.
How did that work for you?
I memorized about 80%, so it was difficult, but I got through it.
that last 20%. Okay.
It slipped away, but I made it through.
It slipped. Well, you got through it. I couldn't tell. It's all good. But I mean, what would you do differently next time?
Ooh, good question. I would not have played that video. I tried to play a video and there was technical difficulties. So I would have probably not done that. Well,
you know what? And that's something I noticed that. And in my own talk, I had some slide issues where a lot of the slides at the beginning, it never made the edit. So, so I would, second, for anyone listening, be really, really careful with slides at all, because clickers or videos that you're kind of hinging on or want to show, unless you know that the production people there are going to be just absolutely amazing, really think twice about that. So I did notice that. Anything else that you'd say about that, Kristen?
Yeah. And actually, I never rehearsed it. So me on that stage was me doing it for the very first time, the whole way through. And so I would recommend rehearsing.
And for not that you fooled me, because the average person would not look like it was prepared. Maybe it was the stroll on stage. Maybe it was, kind of that was really, really, effective in kind of jarring us out of that mode. But, hey,
here's the Easter egg. There's a moment where I drop my head and look at the floor, and that's the moment where I lost the 20%. It felt like 5 minutes. It felt like I stared at the floor for 5 minutes. And I just remember thinking, Kristen, when you raise your head, you have to finish. Like, you have to say something. And so in the video, I think it's like half a second. But in my mind, it was like 5 minutes of forgetfulness. Yeah.
Well, it's like your whole life just kind of flashes in microseconds before your eyes. And then you look up and then you land the plane. So,
yeah.
What were your thoughts? I mean, not to pry too deep in that, but now that we know the backstory, what were your thoughts after, you landed the plane, you walked off stage, did you posture that? Did you frame it in your mind? What did you do?
When it was over, I was surprised how life just went on, because it was such a big deal in the lead up to it. And I was very busy. I was attending conferences. I was doing this in the cracks of my life and of work. And so it was a heaviness in a good way, but like a heavy pressure. And when it was over, I remember just thinking, oh, like, that's it. Like, life goes on. Everything's still running. And even though my video didn't work, it didn't really matter. It was just sort of on to the next speaker. And I was done. And so I remember being very thankful it was over, but also surprised how it wasn't a mountain. It was a hill, and I made it into a mountain.
We've been enjoying the Blitz Round with Kristen Lueck. Her talk is called Why Do Music and Sound Resonate? You can watch that on YouTube. You can type it in, or you can go to BeTheTalk.com, our show notes page. We will have a link to that video, and you can see the Easter egg and all of the stuff in the video that didn't quite make it within the video. Some of the things we talked about. You can also go to Kristen's website at manmademusic.com, and we'll be back in just a moment with Kristen Lueck and the final word of advice. Hey, Talk Universe, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you want to give the talk to change the world, but you don't know how or even where to start, no problem at all. Go to BeTheTalk.com/get accepted for my new 5-day email course that'll show you how. Absolutely free. Just go to BeTheTalk.com/get accepted. And we're back. It's time for the final word of advice.
My advice for anyone giving a TEDx talk is to really use it as a chance to find your voice on that topic. Like, this is a very rare opportunity where you get to speak not from your company or from any other agenda, but personally your own idea. And so use that as a great tool and resource to find your own voice.
Kristen Lueck, thank you so much for coming on the talk today and sharing your wisdom with Talk Universe.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Be the Talk. For tips and resources to help you change the world, go to BeTheTalk.com. See you tomorrow.